My parents didn't book a ride for me to the family reunion. My sister smirked, "Maybe you should walk off your attitude." I laughed and said, "Enjoy the trip." Hours later, as they realized I wasn't coming, something happened that none of them saw coming. My name's Troy Hammond, and I'm 42 years old, still living in the same one-bedroom apartment in Boulder, Colorado that I moved into after my divorce 3 years ago. It's nothing fancy, old hardwood floors, a leaky faucet that my landlord keeps saying he'll fix and never does, and a view of the parking lot. But it's mine. It's quiet. Penny, my cat, likes it just fine, and most days, so do I. Saturday morning started like any other. Sun pouring through the crooked blinds, the smell of burnt coffee filling the kitchen because I forgot about the pot again, and Penny swiping lazily at a bug on the windowsill. I stretched, cracked my back, and grabbed my phone off the counter. That's when I saw it, Mom's message flashing up at me like a little alarm. Family reunion, Sunday. Don't be late. I stared at it for a second, feeling that old knot tighten in my stomach. Family reunions and me, well, we have history. Last year's mess in Durango still hung over us like a bad smell. My sister Mara getting drunk and laying into me about how I wasn't doing enough with my life. Dad pretending not to hear. Mom bustling around pretending everything was fine while everyone sat around awkwardly picking at dry roast beef. Still, family was family, right? You showed up because that's what you were supposed to do. I thumbed out a quick reply. Cool. Are we carpooling or what? I waited. Watched the little typing bubbles pop up and disappear. Nothing. Then my phone buzzed. Mara, maybe book your own ride, big boy. That's all she wrote. No emoji. No love you. Just that cold little jab. Like it was funny to her. Like I was some distant cousin they barely remembered instead of the guy who used to babysit her while Mom worked nights. I put the phone down a little harder than I meant to, breathed in through my nose. Okay, I said to Penny, who blinked at me from her perch. Guess it's that kind of day. I gave it a few minutes, then decided maybe I was overreacting. Maybe they were just busy. So I called Dad. Ring, ring, ring. Voicemail. I didn't bother leaving a message. What was I gonna say? Hey, remember me? Your son. Instead, I stood there in my kitchen, staring at the crusty dishes in the sink, feeling like that 15-year-old kid all over again. The one they forgot to pick up after soccer practice because Mara had a piano recital and I was old enough to figure it out. I made myself a half-assed sandwich, tried to shake it off. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe they'd swing by in the morning and everything would be fine. Sunday morning rolled around too fast. I was up at 7 a.m., duffel bag packed, wearing the only decent button-up shirt I owned. I even put on cologne, for Christ's sake. I waited on the curb outside my building, bag at my feet, the spring sun already heating the sidewalk. Cars passed by, people walking their dogs waved, but no familiar silver SUV. Then, finally, around 8 o'clock, Mara's car pulled up, glinting in the sun. The window rolled down halfway. Mara leaned across the seat, sunglasses perched on her nose, smirk planted firmly on her face. You got a ride booked yet, or are you planning on teleporting, genius? She called out. I forced a smile. Nah, figured my family might remember I exist. She laughed, an ugly, sharp sound, and said, maybe you should walk off your attitude. Might do some good. I looked at her for a long second. Her perfect manicure. The designer hoodie she probably bought last week. The way she always looked like she belonged on the cover of some lifestyle magazine while I showed up with sawdust in my hair. I smiled wider. Enjoy the trip, Mara. She just shrugged, rolled the window up, and the SUV pulled away with a screech of tires, little pebbles pinging against my shins. I stood there a minute longer than I should have, bag still at my feet, watching them disappear down the road. Then I picked up my bag and went back inside. Penny meowed at me from the window, tail twitching like she was pissed on my behalf. Yeah, I said to her, tossing my bag on the couch. Real classy, huh? I KL'd the next few hours doing absolutely nothing. Played a little guitar, made a sad attempt at cleaning the bathroom, fell asleep on the couch with Penny on my chest. Woke up drooling on my sleeve around noon. Checked my phone. Nothing. Not a missed call. Not a text. Not even a passive-aggressive group message from Mom reminding everyone to be grateful for family. I stared at the screen for a long moment. They had to have noticed I wasn't there by now, right? Maybe not. Maybe they didn't care. Maybe they never had. I laughed, but it sounded hollow. Screw it. If they wanted me there so bad, they could have acted like it. I grabbed a beer from the fridge, popped the cap, and sank back onto the couch. Penny curled up next to me, purring like a tiny engine. I was just settling in when my phone buzzed. A call. From Dad. I stared at it for a second, debating whether to answer. Then I sighed and picked up. Yeah? I said, trying not to sound as bitter as I felt. Troy, where the hell are you? Dad barked. Home, I said simply, taking a sip of beer. You were supposed to be here 2 hours ago. We're sitting around waiting for you to show up. I laughed. I couldn't help it. It just bubbled out of me, sharp and bitter. You mean the ride you didn't arrange? The one Mara thought was so hilarious. There was a pause. A long, uncomfortable one. I thought you had your own car, he said finally, but his voice was softer now, unsure. You know my truck's been in the shop for a month, Dad. Jesus. Another pause. I could hear voices in the background, muffled, the buzz of a crowd. Laughter. Plates clinking. Well, just get here, all right? Your mother's upset. Of course she was. Mom was always upset when things didn't look perfect from the outside. I shook my head, feeling something cold settle in my chest. Nah, I said, voice steady. Think I'll sit this one out. Troy, Dad started, but I hung up. And I sat there, staring at the blank screen, feeling the weight of every reunion, every missed pickup, every shrug and forced smile pile up all at once. They didn't want me there. They wanted the idea of me. The smiling son who didn't make waves, didn't call anyone out, didn't remind them that things weren't as perfect as they liked to pretend. I was done pretending. I sat there a long time after hanging up, the TV on mute, the beer going warm in my hand. Penny had fallen asleep curled up against my leg, her tiny body rising and falling with every soft breath. Outside, the sun was starting to dip behind the foothills, casting long shadows across the parking lot. A couple of kids were kicking a soccer ball around, their laughter drifting up to my window. The normalcy of it all made me feel even more out of place, like I was watching the world through glass. I should have been at the reunion. Sitting awkwardly at a rented lodge in Geneisen, eating dry brisket, pretending to laugh at Dad's bad jokes, pretending not to notice Mara's smug smiles every time someone mentioned success. Instead, I was here. Alone. Again. And strangely, I didn't feel regret. I felt lighter. Like maybe this time I was finally standing up for myself instead of begging for scraps of affection. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from my cousin, Brent. Hey man, everything okay? People are freaking out here. I stared at the message for a second. Freaking out? Why? Because I didn't show up? It's not like I was the damn guest of honor. Another text came in, this time from my Aunt Louise. Troy, call your mom. She's really upset. I sighed and dropped the phone onto the couch. Not my circus, not my monkeys. But curiosity gnawed at me. Something wasn't right. I turned the TV back on, more for noise than anything else. Some news anchor was yammering about traffic accidents on Highway 50, the very highway they would have taken to get to Geneisen. I sat up straighter. A sick feeling twisted in my gut. I muted the TV and grabbed my phone, pulling up the local news app. Breaking. Major accident on Highway 50. Several vehicles involved. Road closed indefinitely. Injuries reported. My heart started pounding. I scanned the article, looking for details, for names, anything, but there was nothing yet. Just a vague mention of multiple cars, some overturned, emergency services on scene. I called Brent. He picked up on the first ring. Dude, he said, voice low and panicked. Where are you? Are you okay? I'm home, I said quickly. What the hell's going on? It's bad, man. Real bad. There was a pileup right outside town. Some drunk idiot crossed the line. People are hurt. Your mom, he broke off like he couldn't say it. My throat went dry. What about Mom? I barked. She's at the hospital. So's Mara. And your dad. Everyone who was in Mara's car, they didn't even make it to the lodge. Ambulances took them straight from the highway. I stood up too fast, Penny jumping down from the couch with a startled yelp. Are they? I started, but the words stuck in my throat. They're alive, Brent said quickly. But it's bad. Troy, you gotta get here. I didn't even think. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, and was out the door before I realized I didn't have a way there. My truck was still in the shop. SHT. I hissed, pacing the parking lot. I wasn't going to sit here waiting for news. I pulled up the rideshare app, throat tight, hands shaking. After what felt like forever, a guy named Doug in a beat-up Toyota agreed to drive me all the way to Geneisen for a ridiculous amount of money I didn't even care about at that point. The drive was a blur. I barely noticed the passing mountains, the wide-open sky turning a bruised purple as the sun sank lower. Doug tried making small talk at first, but one look at my face must have told him it wasn't the time. We pulled into the hospital parking lot just as the first stars blinked to life overhead. I threw some bills at Doug, barely mumbling a thank you, and sprinted inside. The waiting room smelled like bleach and sadness. Families huddled together in plastic chairs, faces pale and tight. Nurses moved around briskly, murmuring to each other. I spotted Brent standing by the vending machines, his tall frame hunched, hands shoved deep in the pockets of his hoodie. He saw me and came over fast. "They're in the ER," he said. "Mara's awake. Your dad's getting stitches. Your mom, she hit her head pretty bad." I swallowed hard. What happened? He looked around like he was afraid someone would hear him. Mara was driving. They said some guy in a pickup swerved into their lane. Mara tried to avoid it, but clipped another car and they spun out. Your mom wasn't wearing a seatbelt. Jesus Christ, I whispered. They're lucky, Brent said. Other people didn't make it. The words hit me like a fist to the chest. Other people didn't make it. I nodded numbly. A nurse called my name, and Brent squeezed my shoulder before letting me go. I followed the nurse down a narrow hallway, my boots squeaking against the linoleum. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, casting a sterile glow over everything. I could feel my pulse in my ears, my throat tight as a drum. The nurse stopped outside a curtained-off bay and gave me a small, polite smile. "They're stable," she said quietly. "But your mother's being monitored closely. She's still pretty out of it." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. She pulled the curtain aside. The first thing I saw was Dad sitting in a chair by the bed, a strip of gauze taped above his right eyebrow, a few bloodstains still on his shirt. He looked smaller somehow, older, like he'd shrunk inside his own skin. Mara was lying in the bed, hooked up to an 4, her face pale against the white sheets. One arm was in a sling, and there were bruises blooming across her cheekbone. Mom was in the other bed, still as stone, a bandage wrapped around her forehead. Machines beeped steadily beside her, and for a terrifying moment I thought she wasn't breathing, but then her chest rose and fell, slow and shallow. Dad looked up when he saw me. For a second, nobody said anything. Then Mara let out a weak, raspy laugh. "Well, look who decided to show up," she croaked. Her voice was rough, strained, but that edge of sarcasm was still there, clinging to her like a bad habit. I crossed my arms, feeling the old anger flare up. "I wasn't invited, remember?" I said flatly. Dad scrubbed a hand over his face, his fingers trembling slightly. "This isn't the time, Troy," he said, voice low and tired. "When is the time, Dad?" I snapped before I could stop myself. "When she's hooked up to machines. When you're dripping blood onto the floor." Mara turned her head away, wincing. I took a shaky breath, trying to reel it back in. I hadn't come here to pick a fight. I hadn't even wanted to come at all. But seeing them like this, battered, broken, stirred up a storm of emotions I didn't know how to contain. "She didn't mean it," Dad said finally. "None of us did. We just..." He trailed off, looking helpless. "You just what?" I asked. "Forgot? Like you forgot about the soccer games? The parent-teacher nights? The time I sat outside in the rain for 2 hours waiting for a ride that never came?" Mara flinched. Dad opened his mouth, closed it again. "You think it's easy?" Mara said suddenly, her voice cracking. "You think being the one who keeps everything together is easy?" I stared at her. "You keep everything together?" I repeated, incredulous. She pushed herself up slightly, wincing at the movement. "Yeah, Troy. While you were off, finding yourself, or whatever the hell you were doing after your divorce, someone had to be here. Someone had to take care of them." I swallowed hard. "I didn't leave because I wanted to," I said quietly. "I left because I had to." I couldn't breathe in this family anymore. Nobody said anything. The only sounds were the steady beeping of the heart monitor and the low hum of the fluorescent lights. Dad leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his hands dangling between his legs. "We screwed up," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "We didn't mean to push you away. We just didn't know how to bring you back." I stared at him, the anger draining out of me like air from a punctured tire. "You could have tried," I said, softer now. "A call. A text. Something." He nodded slowly, staring down at the scuffed toes of his shoes. Mara wiped at her eyes with her good hand, sniffing quietly. "I was jealous, you know," she said, surprising me. "You always did what you wanted. Lived how you wanted." I stayed. I did everything they asked. And it still wasn't enough. Her voice broke on the last word, and she turned her face away again. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to fix it. I just stood there, feeling the years of hurt and resentment hang between us like thick smoke. Finally, Mom stirred, a soft groan escaping her lips. We all froze. She blinked slowly, her eyes glassy and unfocused. Troy, she whispered, voice dry and cracked. I stepped forward, my throat tightening painfully. I'm here, Mom, I said, taking her hand gently. Her fingers curled weakly around mine. I'm sorry, she murmured. For everything. Tears blurred my vision. I squeezed her hand. It's okay, Mom, I said, my voice thick. Just get better. Her eyelids fluttered closed again, but her breathing stayed steady. Dad leaned back in his chair, scrubbing at his face again. Mara sniffed loudly, wiping her nose on the sleeve of her hospital gown. For a long time, none of us spoke. We just sat there, the weight of everything we'd never said pressing down on us. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like maybe, just maybe, things could be different. The hospital room grew quiet again, the machines humming steadily. Mara leaned her head back against the pillow, exhausted. Dad sat staring at the floor like he might fall asleep there. Mom's breathing had evened out, and for now, she looked peaceful. I sat down in the chair across from Dad, feeling the ache settle deep into my bones. The room smelled like antiseptic and regret. A soft knock came at the door. It was Brent again, hovering awkwardly with a coffee in each hand. Thought you might need this, he said, handing me a cup. Thanks, man, I said, meaning it. He lingered, shifting from foot to foot, then finally blurted out, Troy, you should probably know something. Before you decide how you feel about all this. I frowned. What do you mean? He glanced at Dad and Mara, who both looked suddenly very interested in anything but the conversation. Brent scratched the back of his neck. I overheard Aunt Louise and Uncle Terry talking at the lodge before everything went down. I waited. They weren't just expecting you to miss the ride, man. They planned it. I blinked. What? Brent nodded, wincing. Mara told everyone you probably wouldn't show. Said you'd find some excuse like you always did. She even made bets with a few of the cousins. My mouth went dry. Dad shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but didn't say anything. Mara closed her eyes like she wished she could disappear into the bed. And the worst part? Brent added, voice low. They had a whole speech planned. About how you were too good to be part of the family anymore. How they were going to make it clear that if you couldn't be counted on, you didn't belong. He looked pained saying it. They were going to cut you off, Troy. Not just emotionally. Legally, too. Grandma's trust fund. The property up in Grand Lake. Everything. The coffee cup slipped from my hand and hit the floor, splattering hot liquid across my boots. I barely noticed. I looked at Dad. At Mara. At Mom, unconscious and oblivious to the whole damn mess. You were gonna disown me, I said, voice eerily calm. Troy, Dad started. I held up a hand. Save it. I stood up, grabbing the back of the chair just to steady myself. All my life I've been the screw-up. The black sheep. The one you had to make excuses for. And you know what? Fine. You want to believe that, go ahead. I took a deep breath. But don't you dare act like you cared. Not now. Mara opened her mouth to say something, but I cut her off. I'm done pretending I'm the problem, I said, my voice rising. You want me gone? Congratulations. I'm gone. I turned to Brent. You still got that family group chat? He nodded. I smiled, but it wasn't a nice smile. Good. Text them this. I won't be part of a family that treats loyalty like a game. Keep your trust fund. Keep your lake house. Keep your fake smiles and backhanded compliments. I yanked my phone from my pocket and typed out my own message. Troy Hammond has left the chat. And I sent it. The little Troy left notification popped up almost instantly on Brent's phone. His eyebrows shot up. I wasn't done. Brent looked at me, uncertain. You sure about this? I nodded. Brent, you ever wonder why I stayed away so much? I asked, looking him dead in the eye. Because peace isn't something you fight for. It's something you walk toward. And I walked out of that hospital room without looking back. 2 months later, I sat on the back deck of a small but beautiful cabin I'd rented near Netherland. Penny curled up on a worn wooden chair beside me, purring contentedly. Life was quieter now. Cleaner. I worked part-time at a custom woodworking shop owned by a friend of mine. I picked up side gigs building furniture for people who actually appreciated the craft. I started hiking again, something I hadn't done since I was 20. And as for the family, they tried reaching out a few times. Half-hearted texts, guilt-tripped voicemails. You should come by. Mom misses you. It's not the same without you. I didn't respond. Not out of spite, but because I didn't owe them anything anymore. Brent told me through the grapevine that after I cut them off, the trust fund ended up in a nasty legal battle. Turns out, without unanimous family consent, certain assets got locked up in probate. Mara lost her share of Grandma's inheritance. Dad had to refinance the lake house. All because they tried to play games. I smiled to myself as I watched the sun dip behind the mountains, painting the sky in streaks of gold and purple. No death. No cruelty. Just me, living better than I ever had. And them? Living with the consequences of underestimating the one person they thought would never stand up for himself.